Hello and welcome back to the Dougie Critchley Football YouTube channel, and it's another episode of the Football 5. 5 things you've missed from around Europe this weekend. Let's get into it by talking about some of the worst deals of deadline day. I'm going to kick off with 3 transfers that do not make sense from deadline day, and in at 1 is Gianluigi Donnarumma. Now, I want to make abundantly clear that I rate Gianluigi Donnarumma as a goalkeeper. He's 26 years old, he's got over 70 caps for Italy, he's already played 10 seasons as a professional. Absolute freak of nature in terms of emerging onto that scene so early. He played a crucial role in PSG winning the league in 23-24, where he prevented over 10 XG, and he was phenomenal in the Champions League last year. Everyone remembers that save from Odegaard, but talk about that one against Rashford, against Aston Villa. I do not think PSG win the treble were it not for Gianluigi Donnarumma, but I do not like this move to Man City. Man City, of course, signed James Trafford earlier this summer from Burnley. This is a returning former academy graduate. He's held in much high regard at Man City. It felt like a real homecoming for him, a natural successor to Ederson. What does this mean for his development now you're bringing in Gianluigi Donnarumma? There's no chance in hell that Donnarumma is sitting on the bench for an entire year. There's only 4 years between them, so it doesn't feel like a natural succession plan either. It's not like Donnarumma's 29, 30 coming in as a stopgap while Trafford develops. And you look at where they're weak in other areas of their squad. You look at the fact they're planning on playing Matheus Nunes and Rico Lewis as their starting right backs all season. Did you really need to drop over £50 million on 2 goalkeepers? I'm really not so sure. This now takes Man City spending to over £370 million in the last 2 windows. And in that time, how much guaranteed, ready-made, win-now quality have you brought in? I would argue Marmoush, Reinders, Cherki. That's about it. The rest of them feel like project players, except for Donnarumma, you could also include as a win-now player. But is that blocking the path for James Trafford? And I do just feel like Man City's business in the last few years has slightly gone off the rails from that early Pep period. You look at their misses, whether it's Matheus Nunes not being used in midfield, Calvin Phillips, Gomez, you look at Doku and Savio not quite living up to those huge expectations in the forward areas, and it does feel like Man City's business has just been a little bit confused recently, and for me Donnarumma is another example of that. Stop what you're doing right now, guys. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Come on, join the party. Second transfer for me that doesn't make sense is Jadon Sancho going on loan to Aston Villa. Now, I think most Man United fans will be delighted to get Jadon Sancho out of the club. He's obviously been unhappy there for a number of years. Chelsea paid not to sign him permanently in the summer. How did he play at Chelsea? I thought he was absolutely fine. Any better than that? No, not really. It's a loan, but Villa are agreeing to pay 80% of his wages. Now, reportedly, according to the Manchester Evening News, which are normally pretty good on Man United stories, he was paid a reported £200,000 per week, which has dropped to £160,000 as there's been an 80% cut, or his wages have gone to 80% of their full potential because there's been a clause in it after Man United failed to reach the Champions League or qualify for the Champions League once again. £160,000 per week for Jadon Sancho in 2025. I think that's a lot of money, especially given the fact that, according to reports, Boubacar Kamara, Emi Martinez and Youri Tielemans were their top earners last year on 150. So Jadon Sancho is going in there as their highest earner. They've worked so hard to offload Emi Martinez's massive wages this summer. Nearly got there with Man United before Man United went in for Seny Lamons. So it really does feel like Aston Villa have helped out Man United in this scenario. How did Jadon Sancho do last year? As I said, absolutely fine. He completed 46% of his dribbles. Bear in mind that at Dortmund, it was never below 55%. He averaged 0.3 expected goals and assists per 90. That was about the same as Youri Tielemans in Villa's squad last year. It was only just more than Ian Maatsen. Is this a player that can really help them with their push for European football and replace the output of Marcus Rashford and Marco Asensio? I'm not quite sure, at least at current form right now. So Jadon Sancho to Villa, for me, it's another miss. And finally, I want to talk about Nicolas Jackson's loan move to Bayern Munich. The fees involved in this are absolutely mind-boggling. They are paying €16.5 million to loan him for a year. There is an obligation to buy him for €65 million next summer. An obligation, they have to pay it. That takes the total package to €81.5 million for Nicolas Jackson. Absolutely vast fee. Bear in mind that Bayern have only paid more than that for 2 players in their entire history, Harry Kane and Lucas Hernandez, and this is a massive commitment. And yes, they did need further strengthening in that area. They've lost Thomas Müller, Matthias Tell left permanently, Leroy Sané has left the club, Kingsley Coman has left the club. They badly needed more forward recruits this summer. But in the end, 80 million euros in the next year on Nicolas Jackson for a season this year where he's going to play very much back up to Harry Kane, who is still absolutely so hungry. He's been one of the best players in Europe so far this season. And they're paying 80 million euros for a player. Could they have found someone cheaper and more effective, arguably, next summer for less money? I think undoubtedly. And from a Chelsea perspective, I'm not sure I'm that hot on it either. Yes, 81.5 million euros. That is a lot of money to turn down for your third choice striker. But, as I pointed out on Twitter on Saturday, if Liam Delap gets injured, which he promptly did against Fulham, that is your only line-stretching natural number 9 in your squad. Joao Pedro is going to pick up so many more minutes all across the front line. He's already been deputising for Cole Palmer. So they've ended up recalling Mark Guiu from his loan move to Sunderland. Icon. Bows out with 1 goal in 2 games to his name. Thanks very much for your services, Mark. We'll take Brian Brobby. Absolutely no problems there. But Nicolas Jackson, have they made a risk there going into a full competition campaign, not having a more senior backup to Liam Delap and Joao Pedro potentially? So I think Chelsea and Bayern, but particularly Bayern, are the losers in this deal. And next up in Football in 5, let's move on to point number 2, and I want to talk about the firing of my doppelganger, Erik Ten Hag. Now, for me, this is pretty inexcusable. And look, I'm not Ten Hag's biggest fan. I think his tactics are deeply flawed. I think some of the players he brought in at Man United, clearly not good enough. And I don't think he's particularly charismatic either. But look, they replaced Xabi Alonso, a manager that had achieved the impossible with Bayer Leverkusen in 23-24, losing 1 game all season, the Europa League final, winning a league and cup double unbeaten. Absolutely remarkable. That is the pinnacle for Bayer Leverkusen. It's never going to get better than that. Ten Hag arrives in May. The hierarchy sanctioned the sale of 5 of their 8 most used players from last season. That includes Florian Wirtz, one of the best players in their entire history. Jonathan Tah, the most experienced centre-back in their squad. Granit Xhaka, their most experienced and high quality, I would say, central midfielder. Jeremy Frimpong, arguably the best right wing-back in the entire world, and their club captain Lukas Radetzky. What do they expect to happen? The results haven't been great. I think it's fair to say a 2-1 loss to Hoffenheim, a 3-3 draw with Werder Bremen, who went down to 10 men, having been 3-1 up in that game. Massively disappointing. There's no way of getting around that. And look, some of the mistakes on the weekend were really shocking. Flecken, whatever he's doing for that 3-2 goal, should never really be repeated or seen again. But if you haven't seen it, he runs 40, 50 yards outside of his goal, misses the ball, tapped into an empty net. The winner, the corner, they could have cleared it 4 times. There was literally 4 attempts to clear it and it finishes 3-3. Shocking results. But Ten Hag and the club signed 16 players this summer. Spare a thought for the likes of Elise Ben-Seguir, who's just signed away part of his future there. Jarrell Kwanzaa, Malik Tillman. These are high quality additions. Ten Hag surely deserves to be given longer than 2 games to stamp his authority on a squad that has been through this much turmoil. I think this is a terrible decision from Bayer Leverkusen, and if not a terrible decision in the long term, I did say in my pre-season prediction videos, I wonder how long he's going to last. You can't surely justify it 2 games into the season unless there's been a complete fall down in communication between manager and hierarchy. I think this is a bad move from Bayer Leverkusen, and I actually feel sorry for Ten Hag. Never thought I'd say those words. Moving on to point number 3, let's talk about Joao Neves and that hat-trick against Toulouse. In terms of individual quality of goals, I do not think you will see a better hat-trick in your life. Look, there's obviously going to be more important hat-tricks. Kylian Mbappe scored one in a World Cup final, of course. But the quality of these goals, you have to see them if you haven't already. 2 overhead kicks, 1 pile driver with the outside of his boot. Joao Neves, superb work against Toulouse at the weekend. And it's really no surprise. People forget that this guy is only 20. He finished last season with 8 assists in Ligue 1. He started 16 of their 17 Champions League games. Only William Pacho made more defensive actions than him last season. He is the complete midfielder at 20 years old. He is a remarkable player to watch. Full credit to him. PSG don't look quite at their absolute best so far this season. I thought Bradley Barcola had a really good game on the left wing as well. They're obviously still leaning into their fitness at the start of this season after taking a pre-season off after their Club World Cup exploit. But Joao Neves, this was a thing of beauty and I'll remember it for the rest of my life. Beautiful stuff. Point number 4, let's talk about Inter Milan's shock defeat. Now, there are 1-0 wins for Juve, for Napoli, for Roma at the weekend, but Inter are now 3 points off the pace set by those three sides, and Cremonese, Jamie Vardy's new club, after a 2-1 defeat to Udinese. They went 1-0 up through Denzel Dumfries, who then gave away a penalty with a handball, which was converted by Keenan Davis. What a throwback. Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest and Watford's Keenan Davis, and then check out the winner from Atta 2. Beautiful curling strike, takes a slight deflection off a Cherby as well. Really disappointing result for Inter. Look, there's no reason to hit the panic button just yet. They played really, really well in their opening game against Torino. Some of the quality of goals in that game were absolutely remarkable. They're still easing in a number of new players. Sucic in midfield is probably their only player that's really got going in terms of their new signings. But it's been a really interesting deadline day in Italy, which I just thought I'd touch on as well. Benjamin Pavard has joined Marseille, who've had a crazy deadline day. Naya Figuered joining, Matt O'Reilly joining, Emerson Palmieri joining. Roberto De Zerbi's gone absolutely mental on deadline day. And their centre-back options now with Balerdi and Aguerd and Medina, really, really strong. Inter's decision to let Pavard go is really interesting, but Manuel Akanji signing on a loan fee with a clause to make it an obligation if they win the league and he plays a certain amount of games, I think that's a really strong addition for Inter. We've seen Inter make the most of these loans and frees in the last few years really, really effectively, so I can't wait to see what Akanji does over there. He played the most minutes of any City defender in their treble-winning season. Shouldn't be forgotten his impact at Man City following his move from Borussia Dortmund. And then in terms of a striking situation that's been pretty interesting on deadline day as well, Colomwani securing that loan move to Spurs. It looked like he was sort of on the verge of joining Juve all summer long, but he's now at Spurs and they bring in Lois Openda from RB Leipzig instead, who've lost Xavi Simons, Lois Openda, Benjamin Šeško, Yusuf Poulsen in one window. Absolutely horrible scenes for RB Leipzig and Leverkusen. They've just been absolutely pillaged. In terms of Openda to Juve, though, I think that's a really smart signing as well. Colomwani obviously already knows the club, having spent the back half of last year there as well. But I think Openda had a really underrated season last year with Leipzig, arguably overperformed against Šeško as well. Šeško got all the credit, but Openda, brilliant campaign, and his work at Lens beforehand, played in the Champions League. I think that's a really nice, diverse skill set as well between him and Jonathan David as well. So Juve, strong end to the window for them. And finally, I just want to shout out some key performers from around Europe so far this season. Kylian Mbappe has been absolutely remarkable. If I had to hand out a Ballon d'Or, I'd probably give it to him on the basis of the opening few game weeks. And look, it's incredibly early days, but he's looked really, really sharp. Only Lamine Yamal has taken more shots than him in the entirety of Europe. No player has created more chances than him. It looks like that fury that he no doubt felt after PSG won the treble on the back of his departure last summer means that he's just looking so motivated and sharp at the start of this year as well. Would have really helped having a summer off with no action with France as well. Also shout out Harry Kane. He's been brilliant for Bayern Munich so far. Serhou Guirassy, I said in my prediction video that I thought he'd make all the difference in the race for second in the Bundesliga. I think arguably the best player in the Premier League so far has probably been Jack Grealish. Fantastic to see him at his free-flowing best, and Everton's business has really, really helped them at the start of this year, along with a phenomenal atmosphere at their new stadium. And then I think Pedri's been immense for Barcelona so far this campaign as well. Who do you think's had an underrated start to the season as well? I realise I've named some big names there, but there's plenty of more underrated players too. Let me know in the comments. So guys, that's all I've got time for on Football in 5 this week. Stay tuned. At the end of this week, I'll have another video dropping, hopefully if all goes to plan, with the return of the Truth podcast, which I do over on the Ranks FC audio platform network, let's say. That will be with me and Sam Ty, with input from Jack Collins too. Hopefully dropping for you on Friday afternoon. Stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching Football in 5 for another week, and I'll catch you then. Bye-bye.